There's a new series coming to Disney Plus on August the 17th called She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. I'm not planning on reviewing this show when it airs, as, at the moment, I prefer to allow a piece of media to breathe a little before I review it. But I thought it might be a good idea to explain who She-Hulk is, as it seems to be confusing a lot of people, and I am a comic fan of old. There are some reactionary types complaining that this is part of the new Disney agenda to feminize all existing male heroes. This, however, is incorrect. It is part of the old Marvel agenda to make sure that Marvel would be the first to create a female Hulk, should the hugely popular Bill Bixby TV series try to introduce one.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
As had already happened in the $6 Million Man with the Bionic Woman. This way, Marvel would own the rights to any female Hulk character created. It was the last character Stan Lee would create for Marvel for 12 years, and the penultimate character he would create for them. Lee only wrote the first issue, which was drawn by fellow comics legend John Buscema, before David Anthony Kraft and Mike Vosburg took over as writer and artist respectively for the next 2 years the series ran. After this series, she would then bounce around as a guest character in a variety of titles, briefly joining the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, before once again gaining her own title in 1989. The original series was called The Savage She-Hulk, debuting in November of 1979, and her origin was that Jennifer Walters, daughter of a small-town sheriff and cousin to the original Hulk, Bruce Banner, on the day her cousin visited her, was shot by a mob boss while driving, crashing her car and requiring an emergency blood transfusion, which Bruce had to administer using his own blood, with side effects perhaps obvious to the reader, but not gamma radiation expert Bruce Banner. Her transformation is also triggered by anger, and she's very similar to the Hulk at this stage, but with a more human appearance. That's about all you need to know about this initial run, as it is the 1989 run that really defined the character. John Byrne, who had previously written a few stories with She-Hulk in, including a one-off special, took on the writing and drawing duties, redefining the character as no longer just a gender-swapped version of Hulk, but instead a smart, confident, and quite libidinous district attorney. Due to a pre-series incident, she is now unable to transform back into Jennifer, but prefers her She-Hulk persona anyway, so she doesn't attempt to find a way to change back. What sets this series apart is that it was not just an action-packed superhero comic, but also deconstructed the genre, and was an early example of metafiction in comics, combining satire and regular fourth wall breaking, as She-Hulk was fully aware she was in a comic, and would not only talk to the author and readers, but would also use this to her advantage to tear through the pages of her issues to get ahead in a story. It was also unashamedly silly at times, and overtly sexual, occasionally falling foul of the Comics Code Authority for its risque content. The 60 issues of this series was the longest-running female comic for Marvel at the time, and laid the foundations for Deadpool's fourth wall breaking years later. This wasn't the only pioneering element of the comic. It also served as a commentary on some of the accepted silliness of comics, as her friend and legal assistant, Wheezy, is revealed to be former Golden Age hero, the Blonde Phantom, Louise Mason, who has manipulated her way into She-Hulk's comic so she stops aging, as characters who are no longer in the comics age like normal humans. There's a generally anarchic tone that sees She-Hulk encounter some of the craziest and occasionally stupidest Marvel characters, such as Dr. Bong, a Howard the Duck villain with a bell for a head, who, in issue 5, accidentally sucks She-Hulk into a series of Saturday morning cartoon parodies, several years before the film Stay Tuned did the same thing. This is because he is attempting to save the minds of his children, the Bong quintuplets, from being warped by kids' TV. He is, of course, unreasonable to the suggestion that he just turns off the TV, a suggestion I would still recommend for any film or TV program you aren't enjoying. It's far healthier, although perhaps not as lucrative, to do that than to devote hours of your life to complaining about it. She-Hulk then escapes her predicament by ripping through a page of adverts to get to his secret lair and defeat him. And then there's Howard the Duck himself, trapped with She-Hulk in the Baloneyverse, amongst other multiverses you probably won't see in any MCU movie anytime soon, such as the Don't Worry Be Happy verse, the Trashiverse, the Mediaverse, and the Sex Party Line verse. It's not all silliness, though, as it does address some social issues, such as the ageism I've already mentioned, and of course sexism, as men constantly underestimate She-Hulk because she's a woman, or attempt to force her into marriage. It's not perfect, though. While its run-ins with the Comic Code Authority seem tame by modern standards, the comic regularly shows She-Hulk wearing very little, or nothing at all, covered by convenient scenery, which is a little dated now, and it's clearly written with the male gaze firmly in place. I'm also not sure they'd get away with the title of the letters page today. There is some truly creative, inventive, and hilarious stuff in each issue, though. The only thing this comic series really fails to do with the character is actually develop her in any particularly significant way. There are no real stakes, nothing happens that can't be ignored or undone, and She-Hulk doesn't grow as a person or learn anything during the course of the series. It's more Seinfeld than Friends in that respect, which is actually refreshing for a comic book character to have so little personal baggage. So many characters come with so much collective history that it can make it impenetrable for new readers, or require later writers to retcon the character's backstory to fit the new writer's vision, but She-Hulk has always remained a relatively clean slate. From what we've seen of the trailers for the Disney Plus series, this iteration of the character definitely seems where the heaviest inspiration comes from for the tone of the show, and I think that's great. The way this comic never took itself too seriously, mocked comics in general and Marvel specifically, riffed on pop culture when barely anyone else was doing it, and was genuinely funny, is brilliant, and that is exactly the kind of original angle I think the MCU needs. I don't think the series will be quite as anarchic as the comic, although this trailer moment comes directly from the comics, so who knows how close they will skew. Now, She-Hulk didn't get her own comic series again until 2004, where that run saw her balance superhero work with legal work in her firm's superhero division. She's back to splitting her time between She-Hulk and Jennifer Walters and finding that balance.
You do revert back to Gen form when you sleep.
This does seem to be where they are taking some additional ideas from for the show, but she's also a more selfish and solipsistic character this time around, being thrown out of the Avengers Mansion for too many breaches of their rules, and eating them out of house and home. But this is a She-Hulk who has been She-Hulk for a long time now, so I'd be surprised if her character in the TV show is based entirely on this version. While this run still has one eye on comedy, it's a different style of comedy, more situational than absurdist, while still retaining some satirical elements. It wasn't as big a hit as the original run, but did have more of a traditional structure that fit perfectly into the Marvel Universe at that time, and so seems like a much more reasonable place to set the TV show. I mean, the show's not out yet, so I'm not going to judge it based on the few bits of footage we've seen in the trailers, but it really seems to be taking a considerable amount of inspiration from the original comic series, hopefully blending the two different takes together. From the footage of the courtroom scene where she takes on Titania, as she does in her first solo special, to the fourth wall breaking, to the parade of low-tier, silly villains she dispatches with ease. To me, this looks like it will be a reasonably faithful adaptation of the character, that skewers some of the more preposterous elements of the MCU and comic book movies, as She-Hulk did to Marvel and comic books in earlier years, but let's wait and see before we judge.